Terrific. And then one more question here.
Yeah, what we have heard is that there can be premium, whether it's a 10% premium on the price or 20%, that's one thing. We have also heard that there are costs involved for certification, etc. I think from the questions which I don't think have been answered, the questions are that how much of that price premium is retained by a big retailer, and how much is the cost which is involved in certification, etc., is actually passed on to the small producer. That is he really getting benefit? I think the questions which our friend from Bangladesh was asking, or the Ugandan cotton, I think that's behind those questions. So we have not got the, any idea of how much this price premium and there are costs involved, how are they shared between the big retailers and the small producers?
It's a great question, and if, just to clarify and quote a famous example, coffee makers actually charging, $1 more for fair trade coffee, and then the actual fair trade aspect, only 3 cents of that actually going back to the coffee producer. So the retailer actually capturing most of the fair trade aspect. So that's a very good question. How much of that are we seeing as well? So I think with the first question, in terms of are we seeing a gap between what's stated and what's actually being done by buyers, perhaps I could open that up to the panel itself.
Yeah, I think that's also a very good question. From a buyer's point of view, I mean, I worked for 11 years for Safeway food stores, and clearly you're in a very competitive marketplace. The first priority, of course, is that you, as a buyer, you have to comply with legislation. So you have to make sure that all your food products that you sell are safe products and comply with legislation. So safe and legal is the first base. And the mission or goal thereafter is to purchase as much sustainable product is available, and that which you can actually just get your hands on, basically, because it's very, very difficult to actually obtain this product. It takes time. So you have to build up partnerships and relationships with your suppliers over many years in order to progress suppliers and producers along the sort of journey of sustainable standards. You start, as I say, with safe and legal, and you move into environmental protection, and you move into worker health, safety and welfare, and social standards, and so on and so forth. But you have to also live in a commercial world, and there's commercial realities as well. But it's really established or moved forward by having sort of longer term relationships with your suppliers, and that's how we did it at Safeway.
Rob, you had mentioned a big gap between what consumers are wanting and how business is reacting. Perhaps you could also expand on, are you actually seeing business do what they say in terms of purchasing?
Yes, I think I'd like to start with this coming right over here, because this is a really important point. The first thing that we have to remember is that from the producer perspective, it is an investment decision. We're not seeing producers as inactive beneficiaries here. We're seeing producers as business people that have to make an investment choice. Now, we stand ready to help them make that choice as to whether they should or should not be fair trade certified, because it isn't necessarily appropriate for them to spend time and money on getting the certification if there isn't a market for their product. So they've got to make the right decision in the first place. Then there is the cost of certification, and of course you've got to remember there is a cost of compliance around this as well. So there are costs involved. Now, from the fair trade point of view, what we do is we say we will pay the premium at the farm level. What the end buyer, the end consumer, coming back to the point over here, pays is actually down to the trade and the brand and the company at the retail end. And increasingly, what we're seeing is two things. Firstly, the alternative trade movement continues to have a price premium to consumers because part of their brand added value is the fact that they're 100% fair trade certified, and they invest directly many other things at the producer level. On the other hand, the mainstream brands, the likes of Starbucks and Cadbury and so on, they're internalizing the cost of doing ethical certification. They're seeing this as a cost of doing business. It's part of their brand ethic. It's part of their investment in supply chains. And therefore, they're not passing on a premium at the point of purchase to the consumer. They're seeing it as a cost of doing business.
Paul, are you seeing the same thing in apparel?
I think in terms of handicraft products, we're talking about a completely different set of circumstances, because handicrafts generally are not certified, and I don't really see a place where they will be in the near future. Even though people are trying to work on standards, I think it's going to be quite cost prohibitive, because most handicraft products are made in a rural environment. I think the challenge in terms of buying patterns for handicraft products at the moment is the fact that most of the purchasing is done in a charity environment, so organisations like Oxfam, who've got retail outlets and this kind of thing. We really need to find a new and different market for handicraft products, and really begin to work with bigger, more mainstream buyers to create more opportunity for rural workers. We're seeing so many challenges in developing countries. Like, my experience is very much in Bangladesh. The challenges that are created by people moving from rural villages to the city and living in slum conditions with very little community around them, these challenges are huge. Being able to simply have better employment opportunities in rural environments allows people to maintain their communities. And I think it's important to remember that when we talk about standards and we talk about all sorts of different things here, we're actually really talking about people. So, yeah, you know, I think we can talk about all sorts of costs, but yeah, getting people jobs, getting food in their mouth and being able to take care of their kids, getting education for their kids, getting good health care, and all that social support is top for me.
It's a bit of a reality check for us all. Frederick, I'd like to invite you up to the podium and maybe give a summary of the excellent discussion we've had, and perhaps answer one question, which is, what will ITC do now as a result of the discussion?
Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you to the panel, and thank you to the audience, including your participation in Dolberg's latest polling techniques. Let me begin by saying that the first takeaway for me is that the idea that the crisis has kind of wiped out the willingness of consumers to pay premiums in the ethical and the fair trade is really absolutely wrong. I mean, this is not a luxury that has been eliminated by the crisis, but on the contrary, what we are hearing here is that you are achieving commercial growth rates of which any conventional company could be very proud of. That's the first point. A second point I'm hearing is that what may have been a much stronger polarization in the past between the fair and ethical trade on the one hand and conventional trade, that the gap is closing. What you were saying, there's so much we have to learn from each other, and I think all the four of you are really examples of people who make these learning happen by having worked in these different fields. Now, next point is, what are the lessons and the implications for companies? Here, we're asking for innovative business models. And I think there we are hearing two sides. We're hearing on the one hand that there are additional costs for producers, and that there are a number of cases where initial investments into organic production and other compliance with fair trade expectations have not translated immediately into the corresponding premiums. So I think here the key point I'm hearing is that whether or not to follow a specific standard is really a market and investment choice. What is appropriate to my company? What is the right way forward here? And I think that it's important in this context to take into account the observation that Nigel and others made, that adapting standards may lead to